Hi, everybody. This is Mark Graban. I'm a senior advisor with KaiNexus, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is titled TWI and Kata, Skill Patterns to Develop a Culture of Coaching. We are joined today by Oscar Roach. I'll introduce Oscar in a minute. He'll be our presenter. Unfortunately, my friend Jim Hunsinger from Lean Frontiers was unable to join us today. But maybe we'll have Jim as a presenter in a future webinar, and we'll carry on and have a great session here with Oscar today. We're really happy that Oscar Roach is joining us today. He is the director of the Training Within Industry Institute and Visual Workplace Australasia. He is coming to us live from Australia. It is the middle of the night there. On behalf of the entire KaiNexus team and everybody attending today, we want to thank Oscar for being up to do this session with us. Oscar has a bachelor's degree of applied science in dairy science from Hawkesbury Agricultural College, which led to a career working in multiple chemical companies and food production firms. Oscar has worked as a manufacturing manager in many settings, and since 2010 has focused on work related to lean, in particular training within industry and visual management methods. So I'd like to welcome Oscar as we turn things over to him. And I think one of the first things we should discuss today is culture, right, Oscar?
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, and Mark, thank you for the opportunity. It is the middle of the night, but one of the things I often say to the Lean Frontiers team that I enjoy doing things like this because it helps me. It just challenges your thinking a little bit, and I've got a little a sign on just to the left of my computer screen here, and it says if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I always find that doing something like this challenges me to do that, and therefore often improves what I believe to be my understanding. So thanks for the chance to do it.
Sure thing.
So yeah, let's given the title, Culture of Coaching, let's start with a definition of culture there, pertinent to the workplace. And the one we use within our work is that culture is the sum of people's habits as they go about their daily work. And look, there's many other answers. There's many other definitions potentially, but that's one answer, and it's one that sort of relates well to the workplace and works for us and for what we do and ties in with the end game in a lot of ways. So given that's one answer, if we want a culture of improvement, then I guess that leads into the thought that we should start with some developing some coaching habits. Because if you're going to modify culture, or if you're going to change culture and bring it in a different direction, then that definition implies that we need to modify habits. And the easiest habits to modify is our own. So we need to start developing some coaching habits if we're going to develop this culture of coaching. So then the second aspect we probably should be very conscious of in this particular discussion is when will a culture of coaching really add value in a lean environment? And I guess I find this transition very interesting, and Mike Rother speaks a lot about this, is for a long time, and certainly in my first exposure to lean was in the early 90s, mid 90s, when I was working for Ecolab, chemical company that's parented in the States actually, and then in my time at Mildura Fruit Juices, and what I understood to be the definition of lean was the elimination of waste, and I'm sure everyone's familiar who's been down the lean path or has attempted to go down the lean path recognises that diagram on the left. And it sort of made sense to me, that diagram, and I guess in the work I did, we had made some improvements, but it was pretty clear, because in most of the work I did myself, it didn't stick. And in the work that I was involved with and others, it rarely stuck in the way that you would have anticipated given the investment. So I always had in my mind, I guess, that something was missing and struggled with that definition of lean, but didn't know much of an alternative or where to head. And then about 4 years ago, I saw the definition of lean that we can see at the bottom there. Lean is developing people who can and will solve problems and make improvements daily. And it was really when I saw that definition that it started to make sense to me. That it's really not, the focus shouldn't be on the elimination of waste. If we focus on people development and we use that statement in blue in the bottom right, lean is developing people who can and will solve problems and make improvements daily. If we use that, then I think we were going to go a hell of a lot further in our lean endeavours and our continuous improvement endeavours than we'd ever gone before. So in other words, to put the focus on the people and the waste will take care of itself was made far more sense to me. And it's since then, and I guess that the timing of that came with the timing of practicing the Toyota Kata habits. So, and that the two together, it was really a bit of a synergy there, and one started to make a little bit more than two. So fundamentally, if an organisation has that definition of lean on the left, being waste removal, then they may get some value out of this, to be honest, but I'm not sure. But if the focus is more on people development, that definition on the right, then I think what's about to follow will make much more sense, Mark. So yeah, that's a bit of an introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, and you focus, you talk about developing people. I've heard Toyota say, when they're working on improvement, that the first priority is developing people, and the second priority is the benefit of the improvement. And I think that's a striking contrast to a lot of organizations. Traditional organizations, excuse me, get exposed to lean, and executives are demanding ROI, they're demanding results. They might be losing sight of this focus on developing people. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, or if you can elaborate on, who do you think, in this kind of culture of coaching, a culture of improvement, who should be solving problems and making improvements?
I mean, I think it occurs at all levels of the organisation. Certainly, the speed of the experimenting cycles, or the speed, the rapidness, if you like, of the improvement cycle, certainly increases the closer you go to the front line, whether it be service or manufacturing. As you go higher up the tree, the improvement cycles will probably be longer. To the extent where you might be a month, a many month cycle once you're at the very top of the organisation. But it's occurring. The pattern of thinking and the patterns of coaching would be, or should be, in the most effective organisations, occurring at all levels. But certainly the speed of the cycle should be the highest. The rapidness of the cycle should be highest at the lowest level, the frontline level, not the lowest level. I don't mean that in that way. I mean the frontline level. So, and this ties in with who we're discussing here in our thoughts that follow. And we've really got two people, if you like. One is the coach, one is the doer. And the doer practices the skill or habit that delivers the result. So the doer practices the skill or habit that delivers the result, and relating back to that earlier slide, may result, if it's successful, and if it's not, that's not necessarily failure, may or will result in the elimination of waste. And then you've got a coach that helps the doer grow their capability as they learn through practice. So this relationship can and should occur at any level in an organisation. It's probably seen and most recognised again as you move closer to the front line, but at all levels of the organisation, in truly excellent ones that I've seen, you can see this occurring at all levels. And one of the ironies that I often find is ideally the coach should be the manager of the subordinate. So the subordinate's the doer, if you like, and the coach is the person's manager. One of the things that I find a bit ironic in the work we do is that quite often we end up, we are asked to be in a coach's role, and I'm quite often working with people and working with a doer, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm happy to do this, but I'm not the right person to do this. The person doing this should be the manager of the person practicing the skill or habit.
So, Oscar, I mean, can you elaborate on some of the skills, particular skills, more specific skills that are helpful for coaches?
Yep, certainly, and we've got 3 base TWI skills and 1 extra that we're going to discuss. So, in terms of we always consider really a skill, if you like, or a continuous improvement skill in the workplace is a countermeasure to something that's lacking. I guess that's the first point to consider. And the first symptom that we're going to discuss is the symptom of the person at any level. The symptom, but this particularly relates to the front line, of the symptom of don't know how and can't do. So from a TWI perspective, the skill that addresses the symptom of don't know how, can't do is the skill of instructing or job instruction. So if the person doesn't know how, can't do, then it's a training issue, and the skill of instructing or job instruction, one of the 3 TWI skills, main TWI skills, is the countermeasure, or what we use to address that symptom. The second symptom is don't care, won't do. In other words, the person has been trained, and I think we often fall into this trap, is that things aren't happening as they're supposed to, and we go, oh, it's a training issue. The solution is we need to train. Well, if the person has demonstrated they do know how and they can do, but they're not doing it, then it's not a training issue, because they know how to do the job and they can do it. So all the training in the world is probably not going to resolve the issue. So the second symptom we look for is don't care, won't do. And the skill, the TWI skill that addresses that is the skill of leading, and we call that in our TWI world job relations. So if you can get on top of both those 2 skills, both those 2 symptoms, and you have people who do know how they can do, and they do care and they will do through those skills of job instruction and job relations, then you're going to have reasonable stability probably in your processes and outcomes and outputs. So at that point, we've then got a symptom of it's physical or it's hard to do. And when we have that symptom, we use the skill of improving methods, which is in our TWI world is called job methods. And that is where the supervisor or the frontline person is able to make best use of available resources, their materials, manpower, and machines. So that physical hard to do is not about redesign, it's not about your big Kaizen events and about redesign of the workplace. Mark, it's much more about what can the supervisor do today and in the next week to best organise the resources available to them to make the job as easy as possible and physically streamlined and things flow and all that sort of stuff. So they're the 3 TWI symptoms, if you like, and the matching TWI skills that address each of those. And at the frontline level, if those symptoms are being addressed through those skills, then you're going to have a stable workforce, stable outputs with performing at their most cost-effective, safest, most likely to deliver quality level of performance. So the fourth one that I've got covered here is the symptom of random or recreational stop-start improvement and not reaching goals. So we see this a lot in organisations, that they endeavour to continuously improve, but it is random. In other words, it's not in a particular direction. And we use the term, and I picked this term up from Richard Abercrombie, who's one of the Institute master trainers, that we call it recreational because it has no goal. It's almost done it's done. It's the two words tie in, I guess. It's done randomly with no specific direction. It's stop start. It's done from time to time. It's certainly not continuous iterative cycles, and generally there's no. It's people find it difficult to reach goals. So the skill there is this one extra, and that's the skill of scientific thinking, and the skill of scientific thinking is very evident in the improvement kata.
Yeah, and I think it's really, I was just going to comment real quick, Oscar. I mean, I think it's really important and insightful to look at these skills as countermeasures rather than going into an organization and saying, well, you should implement these methods because they're good. I think it really helps to identify a problem or an opportunity, something that helps touch on motivation for building new habits like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we often get inquiries, typical inquiry, had one yesterday, that we want to start practicing the Toyota Kata habits, and we want to tie them in with risk assessment. So look, there might be very good reason, but my first question for all that is why. So people, well, we need to do job relations. Why? Well, we need to do the skill of job instructing. Why? So before we even talk about those skills, let's get back to the why and understand the why. And the interesting thing I find, it's a very valuable question, because probably in 50 to 75% of the cases, people look at me with a blank face, or I get if I'm in a group, oh, hang on, we're not. And it's really, the discussion that follows that question is a terrific one. And it's from that discussion where you really know whether you're going to have long-term, what your chances are of longer-term success. Because if it doesn't come back to some basic symptoms like we've listed here, Mark, then we're sort of doing it for the sake of doing it. If we don't understand why, it's going to be a hard sell within the organisation. Probably, people aren't going to connect the dots. Chances of success, probably minimal, to be blunt.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I really love about the TWI skills and the Toyota Kata skills coming together is that they have a very solid base. And that very solid base is plan, do, check and act, or the PDCA cycle that you see there over there on the left. And the interesting thing I'm finding, and I was thinking about this yesterday based on the inquiry to do with risk assessment and combining that with the Toyota Kata habits, is that I start to think now, let's go back to the foundations of whatever skill it is or whatever practice we're heading down. And what I find is that if it's related to something a base principle, then it's got a chance of being of value. If it doesn't relate to a base principle, then I often find that the value is questionable. So the base principle that these four relate very clearly back to is plan, do, check, adjust. This job instruction, if you look at the four-step method, it's absolutely plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, adjust, whichever you prefer. Job relations, there's a four-step pattern for handling a people problem, and I always, at some point in the delivery of that training, I always say it's PDCA for human beings. The skill of improving methods is a four-step pattern, and absolutely PDCA based, and the skill of scientific thinking is a four-step pattern, and all four steps are absolutely PDCA based. So all four have a very solid principle, so it should be no surprise that they're synergistic, and they don't quite work as per this diagram on the right, because it's not a cut-off line between the blue and the yellow, the green and the dark green, the different green. What I probably should have done was overlap those and somehow got them to fade one into the other, because that's a much truer reflection of how it actually functions. So let's move on and just discuss the skill of those four skills in a little bit more detail. Mark, so the don't know how, can't do ties in with the skill of instructing or job instruction. So there's 4 get ready steps for job instruction. The first is we have a timetable or a plan for training. The second is, and probably the most pivotal, is we break down the job, or we create a recipe for our training. In other words, the script or the recipe that the trainer will follow in training this task, whatever that may be. We get everything ready and we arrange the work site, and that's because the leader, the trainer in this case, always sets a primary example for how the workplace should be whenever this task's being done. Please excuse me. Then we're ready. So we have a 4-step method, PDCA based, as I've already said, a 4-step pattern, and that is we prepare the worker. And that's ironically, and this is the grey, this is that shade of grey, because in prepare the worker, we're actually conducting a JR exercise to make the worker feel comfortable. If the worker doesn't feel comfortable or the doer doesn't feel comfortable, then it's in instruction's probably going to be a tough road. So then step 2 is we present the task, and there's a very clear pattern we, the instructor, use, or the instructor uses, and then the learner or the worker does it back. In other words, they try out performance, and then there's a follow-up, which is where there's so the tryout performance is the check, and then the follow-up is the act. So there's a 4-step method for instructing. Just before I go on to the coaching of that in David Meyer's book, Toyota Talent, there's a key line in that, and he says the identification and presentation of key points is the single most important aspect of the training process. So key points are identified when we break down the job, and there's a definite means of identifying the key points. And when we present the task, we present the key points, and in 3, the learner applies them back. And I think that's in all of Toyota Talent, which I got a lot of value from in probably 2008 or so. It's the key line. The identification and presentation of key points is the single most important aspect of the whole training process, and should never be lost sight of. So we've got a doer, as I said in that probably 3rd slide, and we've in JI we've got a coach. So the coach of that doer, the points they should be following, and notice, ironically, PDCA based. The coach is considering, is there a plan? Then they're considering, then there's a reflection point here. After the plan's been determined, there's a reflection point with the doer. In other words, what's you, the doer, learnt or gained or learned about the task, learnt about the workers up to this point. Then there's assessment of the JIB quality, or consideration of the quality of the JIB, because the coach will usually observe a delivery. And then there's the coach then observes a delivery and provides feedback on that. And then from that, the coach then determines with the doer, what are they going to do next? Further training, modify the JIB, whatever it may be, training of a different person as per their timetable. But the consideration there is, what are you going to do next? What do you expect to learn from that? This is the coach of the doer, and how quickly can we go and see what we've learned? Now, the reason that reflection is highlighted, Mark, and the next and learn how quickly, because that's common in all the coaching points, as you're going to see. So that covers the skill of job instruction, and at the end of that, if that's done well, then you'll notice we've gone from don't know how, can't do on the left being red, to our workers, our people know and know how, and they can do, or the workers know how and can do. So we'll go on to the job relations, where we have the skill, the symptom of don't care, won't do. We have the skill of leading, job relations, which is what the doer practices, if you like. There's 4 foundations to job relations, 4 proactive things we should be focusing our activities on, not week by week, but day by day. Let each worker know how he or she is doing, give credit when due, tell people in advance about changes that will affect them, and make best use of each person's ability. And the biggest disservice I can do to those foundations is read them out in 15 seconds and make them sound as simple as that, because they're not. But let me tell you, of all the training I've done including my Bachelor of Applied Science, I would consider the week I did of Train the Trainer job relations to be the most valuable thing I've ever done in my life, in terms of the impact it had on the way I function and the way I operate. So these foundations should never be undersold, but we haven't got time to go into the detail here. Then there's the four-step pattern for handling a people problem, PDCA based. Firstly, we orient ourselves, which is not part of the 4 steps. Then there's a 4-step PDCA for humans. We get the facts, we weigh and decide, that's the plan bit. We take action, that's the do, and then we check results, and that's the check and act or check and adjust. For coaching points for the doer who is practicing job relations is that we use is first question we ask is, what's your most important people objective right now? What facts do you have now? And the reflection comes in there. In other words, what have you learned up until this point? Based on that, what's your possible actions? And then they're based on the first 3, what's your next step? So this is, remember, the coach asking of the doer, what's your next step? What do you expect to learn from that? And how quickly can we go and see what we've learned? So you can see a very similar coaching pattern that you saw in the previous JI one. And again, PDCA based. And one of the key points to take out of JR and often missed is that the earlier we start to handle a problem, then the more likely that when we weigh and decide our possible actions, the 4 foundations will be one of the 4 or more will be underpinned in our possible actions. And through this, if we do this well, we'll have people who care and people who do. In other words, they're engaged. So we'll move on to the 3rd skill of TWI, and that is the symptom physical hard to do. The skill of improving methods is job methods. How to improve? We break down the job, 4 steps. We question every detail. We develop the new method. We apply the new method. So 4-step PDCA pattern. There's 6 questions that occur when we question every detail, and this is the biggest value point in JI, is we ask, why are we doing this? What is the purpose? And then if we still are going to do this particular step of the task, and often we find there that we think, well, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? There isn't any. We should eliminate the step. But if we then determine that there is value in that particular step of the task, we then ask, where should we do it? When should it be done? Who is the best person to do it? And then lastly, how is the best way? Because what we tend to do without applying the JM skill, job method skill, is we start down the bottom. How is the best way to do this? We never consider whether the step in the task is really adding value, and then the where, the when, and the who. So the how comes last, and that's a pivotal part of the JM skill, because without that, we tend to ask the how first, and we don't eliminate waste when we should. And there's a Peter Drucker saying, and I may get this slightly wrong, apologies if I do, but there's no greater waste than doing something really well that should not be done at all. And the JM skill, particularly the 6 questions, addresses that, Mark. So the coach, again, 4 points. What's your current plan with use of JM, and why? And what have you learned, the reflection, what have you learned up till now? The job breakdown sheet quality, in other words, for the one you're working on now, let's have a look at the quality of that. How well are the 6 questions being used, and what outcomes are we looking at? Have we eliminated? Have we moved, etc., etc.? Then the quality of the proposal, and then again, what's your next step? Key point of all coaching cycles, as well as the reflection. What is your next step? From that, what do you think you'll learn, and how quickly can we go and see what you have learned? And if we do that well, we've got tasks or jobs that are as easy as is practical at that time. The improvement kata is the fourth skill we've discussed. Remember we said the symptom was random, recreational, improvement or stop-start, not reaching goals. The skill we're going to apply here, the remedy if you like, another way to think of it, is the skill of scientific thinking, the improvement kata. The learner does that. There's 4 steps of the improvement kata. We understand our direction, we grasp the current condition, we establish the next target condition, and we experiment towards that target condition. And again, as I said earlier, one of the very early slides, you can probably recognize the PDCA pattern there. The coach has, in this case, 5 questions, and these the base questions that you'll find in any search of Mike Rother's material. Firstly, the coach asks, what's the target condition? So that's an orienting question. Basically, why are we having this discussion? What's the value? The value is we're going to achieve that target condition. And then what's the actual condition now? In other words, and from that we understand the gap. But again, you can see there, just after we've determined our actual condition now, there's a reflection. In other words, what's occurred up to this point and what have we learnt most recently? Then the third question is, what's our obstacles to the target condition? And then a key point, which one are we going to focus on now? And then you can see there again, the fourth question in the coaching pattern that Mike has identified is, what's our next step? And the fifth, what would you expect to learn from that? And how quickly can we go and see what you have learned? And from a coach's point of view, when we check, we learn. And what the coach needs to be looking for, the coach of the learner, is when we check, we learn, and that the learner is actually connecting that learning to our next step. So the next step is not random, and that's what the bit that really takes out the randomness, is that we must be ensuring as coaches that the learner connects the learning they've had to their next step, all the while striving for target conditions. And that keeps us going in a direction of the target condition and reduces the risk of this recreational random improvement. And from that, if we do this well, we get goal-directed experiments as opposed to random improvements or random experimentation. So Mark, that's a bit of a summary of those 4 skills.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of there's a lot there that makes me think of core lean Toyota production system principles. The idea of focusing on quality and safety, the job instruction and proper training really contribute to that. I think the idea of respect for people and explaining why with those key points instead of just being a directed boss, just do it. Why? Because I said so. I loved how you asked why earlier. There are better, more legitimate answers to the question of why. And I think the lean principle of customer focus, if we're viewing the person being trained as an internal customer, that the trainer has a responsibility to the trainee, to the learner, as opposed to the other way around, or an organization, saying, well, we checked the box, I trained them, as opposed to thinking of it as a PDCA cycle. You bring up a lot of really good points there. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, or if you can maybe help with understanding some of the parallels between the habits of Toyota Kata, job relations. I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's something I certainly lose sight of. We've got a guy, an ex-Toyota guy, who works for us now, based down in Melbourne, and it's certainly something he's got me to focus on a lot more strongly, is the why. He often says, even just the other, we're doing some work, job relations work with Boeing in Port Melbourne, and something came up there, and he looked at me and he said, so did the people here understand the why? And I looked at him and I thought, no, I didn't explain that. I did not cover that well. So they've got there's no wonder they reacted the way they did. And I think we lose sight of that. I think we lose sight of the why far too often. And that challenging ourselves on the why, if there's not a suitable answer to that, then don't do it. If there's not a strong answer to the why, then we shouldn't do it. So that does come into JI, and that's one of the ways, the challenges for identifying key points. You know you haven't got a key point if you don't have a solid answer for if you don't have a solid reason, if there's not a solid why. JR, I think get the facts helps us understand. What often happens is we see in JR, people jump to conclusions. But when they have to get the facts, and particularly they talk with individual concerned and get their opinions and feelings, that all of a sudden the doer in this case understands the why, and then all of a sudden the behaviour we're seeing, which we thought was just being obstinate, is understood because we see the why. So now we've got a much clearer course of action because we can address the why, and that occurs all the way through. Those skills that you can use, the why analogy comes up in all those skills. Comes up in the JM, the questions, the 6 questions. So moving on, sorry, I just bumped my cord. I'm slightly conscious of time. So there's parallels of the improvement kata and JR. Let's have a quick look at those. So in JR, in the first session of JR, the 5x2 hours JR delivery, we put a model up on the whiteboard. And the model is essentially that an effective supervisor will get results through people. So the typical results we see that a supervisor is accountable for, a leader is those ones there: production, cost, safety, quality, maintenance, training. We observe through a little exercise on the whiteboard that those results, a good supervisor doesn't achieve those results themselves, they get those results through people. And we focus ourselves on, in the training, on what we call the job relations line. If that line, and that message there's a relationship between the supervisor and their people. If that line is straight, strong and correct, then there's a much greater chance that those results will be as per the standard expected. If that line is long and wobbly, note that I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because it always exists, but if that line is long and wobbly, those results are harder to achieve. So a supervisor gets results through people. It occurred to me there's a very strong similarity between JR and the improvement kata, because with the improvement kata, the improvement in results happens through people. So on the left, we say a supervisor gets results through people, whereas the improvement kata, we have an improvement in results happening through people, because processes don't improve themselves. And as far as I know, even the smartest computers that I've ever seen, maybe I'm showing my ignorance here, but results doesn't happen through them. Automation, I guess there's some automation that to some extent improves the performance right now, but there's no automated system for continuous improvement, as far as I'm aware, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. So improvement in results happens through people. In that yellow spot, we have our target conditions now. When we achieve our target conditions, we'll improve the results on the left: production, cost, safety, quality, maintenance, training. So the achieving of the target condition is actually done by the learners, the people. There's a job relations line between the coach and the learners, the people, the doers. And the evidence I've found is that those 4 foundations, as much as they stick on the left, is they stick on the right. If that job relations line between the coach and the learners, the people, is not straight, strong and correct, then the target conditions, people really struggle to achieve those. So the 4 foundations apply equally well on the left and the right.
And Oscar, what are some of the synergies with other TWI skills beyond job relations?
Yeah, good. So this links in well with the next slide. Let's firstly quickly have a look at the improvement kata. We have 4 steps of the improvement kata, and this is taken directly from one of Mike's slides. As I said earlier, and one of the earlier slides of mine, we get the directional challenge. So this shows that 4 steps more diagrammatically. We get the directional challenge. In other words, we have a binoculars there. We can see in the distance where we're headed. And then we move bottom left. down here to step 2, where we grasp the current condition, and you can see that magnifying glass there where we look closely at the current condition. The third step, we set ourselves a target condition with a date. So it's really an interim step, if you like, or an interim state between where we are now and our goal. And then step 4 is we conduct our experiments to get there. That's the 4 steps of the improvement kata. The skill of leading or job relations happens is absorbed throughout all these 4 steps. The greatest focus of the skill of leading is probably down here where we're conducting our experiments to get there. You, the coach, is leading the doer. If that job relations line isn't straight, strong, and correct, because remember, the actual experiment happens when the coach is not there. The coaching cycle is just a summary of what's happened up till now and a review of what's going to happen next. The actual experiment happens when the coach is not there. So if you want the learner to do something and to conduct an experiment according to the plan when the coach isn't there, then I would suggest that the job relations line needs to be straight, strong, and correct. And that goes a little bit back to, with job relations, you have a strict definition of management or leadership, but the prime one I often add in there is a really good leader. You know when you've got a really good leader, because what they want to be happening is happening when they're not there. And it's a little bit the same here with the job relations skill. But look, if we're not practicing job relations well within an organisation, we're probably not going to get people on board with the direction or the goal. We're probably not going to get a true understanding of the current condition, and we're probably not going to get their contribution to the target condition. They're not going to understand the why. If they don't have the buy-in, it's going to be hard to get them to experiment towards that. Then we did a webinar with Lean Frontiers about 3 months ago, and Dave Hyam, the Boeing site director, said this, and I thought it was beautiful and truly illustrates the point I just made. He said, if people on your team don't trust your intent, it'll be difficult to make progress. So and he identified job relations as a key skill in getting people to trust your intent. So a fair bit of step 1 of the improvement kata is about setting intent. So it's going to be difficult to get towards that intent if people don't trust you. And I thought that was a terrific saying and really embodies what this diagram here. Then we have what we generally see is we have these symptoms popping up as obstacles in our experiment path. Don't care, won't do, don't know how, can't do, physical, hard to do. So the symptoms pop up. There's obviously others, but many times those symptoms appear there as obstacles. And so the countermeasure skills of job relations, job instruction, and job methods come in as the actual experiment, if you like. And I've seen many times, had a great example when I was in Pennsylvania at Allentown from a case study about 3 weeks ago, where the person, without realising, who delivered the case study, brought in a symptom of don't care, won't do, and illustrated how one of the foundations was practiced to actually, as the experiment, if you like, to eliminate that obstacle. So one of the key points here, sorry, just want to quickly mark, one of the key points here is, I think what you might be able to see there, that it's almost, the improvement kata is almost a pull system for the required skills, because we don't practice JR in that experimenting pattern or JI unless there's a pull for it, unless we have a symptom. And the same can be applied for 5S and Kanban systems and all those other skills or remedies, if you like. We won't perform those, or we won't implement those. Sorry, I shouldn't use that word. We won't practice those words unless there's a reason for doing it. So the improvement kata becomes a pull system for all those tools and skills and practices of lean, if you like. Very effective at doing that. Sorry, Mark, you were going to say?
No, it's all right. So, to wrap things up, I mean, how would you link all of this together to create a culture of coaching? How would you connect this with lean and the idea of a lean culture, perhaps?
Okay, good, thank you. So Covey did this diagram back in 1989 of culture, and it sort of adds a little bit more context to what we started out with, is that culture is a sum, if you like, or the intersection of our knowledge, our skills, our attitude and desire. So our knowledge builds our what and our why. Our skills build our how to, and our attitude and desire build the want to. And where they intersect, we end up with a group of habits, behaviors and mindsets. So it's that intersection of habits, behaviors and mindsets, and we notice the use of the word habit, that actually form the culture of our organisation. So a lean culture could be considered a pretty good start, from my view and my experience, is a lean culture can be identified by one where we've got these fundamental skills being practiced against those symptoms, the skill of JI, the skill of JR, the skill of JM, and the skill of the improvement kata are being practiced, but the key point there is alongside a coach. So those skills plus a coach, who is practicing PDCA cycles, will lead us towards this lean culture. So the coach works on building the skills, the knowledge, the attitude and desire. So that's a key point there, is the coach's role is to work on those three elements, which when they intersect will give habits, behaviors and mindset. And if we're using those 4 skills on top left as a basis, I would suggest that you're on a reasonable pathway to developing the right habits, behaviors and mindsets for a lean culture. And I'm sure a lot of you people out there who've been involved in CI will be familiar with this diagram, and it ties in well with this discussion, Mark. So we PDCA, we continuously improve. We have to hold ourselves from rolling back. We need to develop a standard. We need to have a standard or standardization. Could spend a lot more time on the difference between those two. But through our standard, we hold our standard through know-how, can-do, and caring, addressing the symptom of care and doing. We have engaged people. So the coach and the doer together lead to that. Then we have goal-directed experiments, which drive that PDCA cycle, and to a certain extent drive the JM PDCA cycle. So that really focuses on that end game of driving continuous improvement forward through using PDCA patterns and establishing these greens of know-how, can-do, care and does, and goal-directed experiments, which will keep that PDCA ball rolling in the direction of the continuous improvement arrow. So just as a summary, I started out with the definition of lean that certainly fits very solid in my mind. People solving problems and making improvements daily, not weekly or monthly, but small iterative improvements daily. And by the way, the interesting thing happens, and I've seen this occur many times, if we focus on the right-hand side, we will be able to say, oh, and by the way, look back at all the waste we eliminated, because I've never seen a sustained improvement or a sustained problem solved that hasn't eliminated waste along the way. But it was never the outset. But I've never seen an improvement or a sustained improvement where waste was added. So it just doesn't happen that way. Problems are solved and improvements are made daily. Waste will be eliminated, I can assure you. And that more or less wraps it up, Mark. I was a bit over time. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's right. Well, we still have time for questions. I'll make a couple quick announcements. I want to thank you, Oscar, for presenting today and sharing your perspectives and helping connect the dots between these different methodologies. So it was very helpful. I want to invite people, if you enjoyed today's webinar, if this is perhaps your first time with us, we have a on-demand library of past recorded webinars. You can find that by going to kainexus.com/webinars. You can also find us on our YouTube channel. If you search KaiNexus, we post the webinars there. We have a blog. If you go to blog.kainexus.com, lots of great articles and other resources available to you on an ongoing daily basis. The other announcement I want to make is about our next webinar. is going to be on September 24th. Jeff Hunter is going to be presenting on the theme of putting strategy back in strategy deployment. Jeff is a former strategy executive at the health system ThedaCare in Wisconsin. He's the author of a new book that I like very much called The Patient-Centered Strategy. And you can register for that by going to kainexus.com/webinars. And then let's go ahead and move ahead to the Q&A slide. Oscar, we've got contact information. I'm sure people may want to email you questions. We've got questions here. Barbara said, let's get your reaction to this. And I liked this phrase too. Working instead of random improvement, Barbara says, random improvement is often a strategy to avoid tackling the really difficult problems. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And I think it's funny, we did we have a Toyota Kata simulation, and I ran it yesterday. And I think one of the things, it's step 3 of the improvement kata that really helps with that, because when we identify, when we understand our current condition, sorry, was it Barbara? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Barbara's point is very valid, because at that point there, we start to see things we don't like. And one of the things we say in our training of the improvement kata is, when you're understanding in current condition, we get people to think, if your customer came in, what would they want? What would they not want to see? Or what would they want to see? Or what would they not want to see? And that really can prick people. Oh, we wouldn't want them to see this. Well, that's part of current condition. But then what people tend to do is they jump into solving problems, and they'll pick the easy ones, as Barbara's implying often happens. But that's not what we do in improvement kata. Before we start doing any work or experimenting, we set ourselves a target condition. And I find that really challenges people, and is probably the hardest part of the improvement kata. So a target condition is an interim state, somewhere where we need to be between where we are now and our goal, that the process will be producing better results. So the target condition is not the target. It's not the outcome of the better spot. It's identifying that better position. What is this process going to look like? What does this process need to look like in 1 month's time that will deliver a better result? And that really challenges people. And I find that a difficult one to train, and the skill of that only develops through practice, is to really get people to visualize, what is it going to look like when it's better. Now, once we've identified that, what's stopping us getting there? What are our obstacles? And we design experiments to get rid of those obstacles. So as per Barbara's point, if one of those obstacles is the nasty one that we don't want to address, well, I'm sorry, we're going to need to, because it's clearly in the path on the way to our target condition. It's the target condition which is going to add value from the organisation's point of view. So it certainly helps address that, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, we got a similar question from Joaquin and Jason. Who coaches the coach? What's the routine for coaching the coaches? And Jason adds, is there a way that a project management office might fit into that?
Ooh, I don't like that question. And the reason I don't like that question is because I suspect they might not like my answer, depending on what department they work in. So I get a little bit nervous when I hear about coach of the coach. And I get a little even more nervous when I hear about coach of the coach of the coach. And how far do we go with that? Because the coach should be the manager. And the coach of that manager should be the manager's manager. And the coach of the coach of the coach should be the manager's manager's manager. So if you're really, the blunt answer to that question is, if you're really going to do this directly, so if you're really going to embed yourself in this, these patterns of thinking we've discussed, then managers need to buy into it. Otherwise, what's the role of the manager? So if it's not the role of the manager to develop the people below them, then I'd really question where all this is heading. And this goes back a little bit to many years ago, about 2003 or 4, where I was doing quality systems training. And I remember doing some training on a bottling line with some bottling line people of a local wine company. And I said to the group of people on the bottling line, who's responsible for quality? And they pointed up to the laboratory and said they are. And I thought, oh, we've got a problem. And I think it's a little bit the same. Who's responsible for the development of the doer? Then the manager. Who's responsible for the manager's development? Their manager. So, yeah, but I think the role of the, go on, Mark.
Well, it's just, I'm sorry to jump in. There was a follow-up question, and I had a similar thought. Do you see value in external coaches for any reason, or is there a role to help get started with TWI to train managers in these approaches?
Absolutely, and that's what I was about to say. There's definitely a role for internal departments, but the role of the internal departments is to help management establish this framework. So it's not to do the framework themselves if it can possibly be avoided. It's to help the managers establish this help management establish the framework. There's absolutely a role, but if it can be avoided at all cost, it's not to do this work. It's to help establish the framework for this work. Yeah, that's the role. Okay. Whether it be internal or external is irrelevant. If the company's got internal resources, that's the best outcome. If they haven't, then they use external resources, but the role of that resource, regardless, is to help management establish this framework, not to become part of the framework.
Right. Here's a question from Sudan. Might not be easy to answer quickly, but in the service industry like healthcare, work is often perceived as more individual than team and might be considered more art than science. How can TWI and Kata be ingrained as an effective strategy, and what's the groundwork to be done to be successful?
Good question, and there's a long answer to this question, but the approach based on the experience of people like Skip Stewart with Baptist Memorial, who's done a lot of work with the job instruction, job relations, and the improvement Kata together. The approach is exactly the same. The approach is exactly the same, whether it be service orientated or whether it be manufacturing based. You're still seeking an outcome from a set of actions. Goals will be slanted differently, and it may not be as black and white, but the pattern of the improvement Kata, for example, is exactly the same. What goals or challenge are we setting ourselves? And it might be in patient satisfaction or whatever it may be. Where are we at now? What's a condition that we need to set ourselves, and how do we move towards that? And if we use that framework, what experiments do we need to use to move towards that? And if we use that framework, then those obstacles of don't know, can't do, and won't do, and the others, they're going to come in. They will come into that in our experimenting, and the countermeasure skills, if you like, of JI, JR are going to be required. And then JR overall is going to be required from an improvement Kata point of view. So it's not something that's easily answered in a couple of minutes, except to say that if you go back to the base principles that we've discussed, then you can apply this in any situation. My business partner, Ben, his main client is a county council in central New South Wales, and that client is using all the skills that I've mentioned. In this, they're a service organisation. Their customers are the ratepayers, the people who pay their rate. I'm not sure what you call that in the States, but the people who pay their rates. So these skills are equally applicable in that organisation as they are in a wine company that produces bottles of wine.
Right. And maybe Sudan, you can email me, you can email Oscar. TWI was used in healthcare during World War II. I've got a nursing journal article from, I believe it's 1947. In more current day, Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle has used TWI. In fact, they've written a book on that subject about standard work in healthcare, and I think it's quite useful. But there's got to be motivation, and tying it back to Oscar's point, it's got to be a countermeasure to a problem. If people don't see a problem with their current state, I don't think there's much hope for adopting any of these great approaches. But we're at the top of the hour, so I want to wrap up, and on behalf of the team at KaiNexus and on behalf of our attendees, Oscar, I want to thank you very much for being up so early to share such great insights with us today. I do want to also thank the folks at Lean Frontiers. It's unfortunate that Jim Hunsinger was unable to join us today, but I want to thank Lean Frontiers for making the connection to Oscar and suggesting the webinar. I would want to invite people to go visit leanfrontiers.com, take a look at some of the upcoming summits that they hold. And Oscar, you're presenting next year in February at the, are you presenting at both the Toyota Kata Summit and the TWI Summit?
Yeah, so I'm presenting at both, and on the Wednesday, the middle day in Savannah, we're actually running our simulation, our Toyota Kata simulation, which illustrates the skills of job instruction and job relations. Also, we pull that into the actual simulation during the day, and we're going to be running both simulations, both the manufacturing simulation and the service one that we've developed. So there's going to be two groups, and so attendees can join one or the other. And there's a maximum of 12 in each participation, in each simulation. So if people are interested, they need to move fairly quickly on that one.
Okay, well, I encourage people to do that. And again, you can learn more by going to leanfrontiers.com. So thank you, Oscar Roach, our presenter today. You see his contact information there. You can visit the website at twi-institute.org. And on behalf of everyone at KaiNexus, again, this has been Mark Graban. I want to thank you for tuning in with us today.
And thank you, Mark, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Oscar, very much.